From the heart of Central Florida, you're listening to the most electrifying show in media. A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. So glad to be back for hour 2 of our program, coming to you on FM and AM and on our website at neighborschoice.com. If you're listening on radio, make sure you set it to this station for your go-to news and information destination from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. We join you. And if you're listening on live, it's great to have you. If you're on a video platform, please subscribe there if you want to continue to get our content there. If you're listening on a podcast, it's great to subscribe to the RSS feed and give us a rating and review that helps people like you find our program. We like to cut through the noise and confusion and get folks who really are not pushing some kind of special interest talking point, something that's fashionable up in D.C. So we like to talk to folks like my guest now. He's a former CIA officer, someone who is also a bona fide son of American revolutionaries. He says at least 24 of his ancestors, men and women, fought to free the American colonies from British rule. We have with us Larry C. Johnson. How you doing, sir?
I am well, Dave. How are you? Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. I'm doing well, and I wanted to get you on because, you know, we've got a new year. There was a lot of talk that as soon as the frost hit the pumpkin, there was going to be a big Russian, kind of blitzkrieg style take down of the Ukrainian forces. It seems like it's not happening like that. It's a little bit different, kind of a slower roll. And of course, you follow it more than I do, so I wanted to have you on to kind of get your take of what's happening so far right now.
Well, the Russian objective from the beginning, they said, was to demilitarize Ukraine, which means basically eliminate the army and denazify it. And what is going on right now, the Russians are just grinding the Ukrainian troops into dust. They called it a meat grinder. The casualty rate, there are, for every one Russian killed or wounded, there are 8 to 10 Ukrainians killed and wounded. And in fact, this is sort of reminiscent of what happened during the Civil War, where the South was smaller, the Civil War in the United States in the 1860s. The South, by virtue of just being a smaller landmass and smaller population, it couldn't sustain the casualty loss. So Ukraine finds itself in a similar position. Likewise, they shoot for every one artillery shell they shoot, the Russians fire back 6 or 7. So, and Ukraine no longer has the ability to produce those itself. It's entirely dependent upon NATO and the United States, who oddly don't have the industrial base to produce what Ukraine shoots. In other words, I know one of the defense contractors that would be tasked with producing the shells that are fired by the M777 howitzer, they can make in 1 month what Ukraine fires in 2 days. So it's just a complete mismatch. So when you put all that together, the Russians have time on their side. They're under no pressure, but they're just chewing up the Ukrainians. I mean, what the Ukrainians doing now is they've extended their mobilization to men ages 16 to 60. Well, the last guy in Europe that did that was a fellow named Adolf Hitler, and that was in the last days of the war as the Russians were closing in. So Ukraine is really in very difficult straits. And the Russians aren't tipping their hand what they're going to do and where they're going to do it. You got to recognize they've not done a full mobilization. They have the potential for a 2 million man army, and they have upwards only around 300,000 to 400,000 fighting right now in Ukraine, and it's over a 450-mile front. So if you think of the distance from Jacksonville, Florida, up to Raleigh, North Carolina, that's quite a chunk chunk of territory to cover. And while 450,000 troops sounds like a lot, it's not a lot when it's spread out over that kind of distance.
Now, there's talks with the new administration in Israel. Fox News says Ukraine decries Israel-Russia chat and suggests change of policy amid new Netanyahu administration. There's other, reports, Jewish Telegraph Agency saying, in first speech, Israel's new foreign minister signals a closer relationship with Russia. What do you make of this story? Is this a change taking place in this front?
Oh, yeah. Israel's not crazy. So Russia, because of its close relationship with Iran, is in a position to help control and keep Iran from creating a threat for Israel, number one. Number two, Russia is brokering a peace between Turkey and Syria. Russia has been fighting in Syria now for 8 or 9 years at the invitation of the Syrian government, because the United States, the United Kingdom, and Turkey tried to overthrow Bashar Assad. So now they're staring at the face that Turkey and Syria are going to bury the hatchet. Syria will then have its army, which is now battle-tested, on Israel's northern border. And the last thing Israel needs is to have a hostile threat on its northern border. So it entirely makes sense. And I think they can read the tea leaves, despite all the lies and propaganda that people in America and Europe are being fed about the great victories that Ukraine is enjoying, and that the Russians are getting thrashed and that they're losing. It's all a lie. It's just the opposite. And I know that Israel is probably doing a much better job of having a good understanding from intelligence what is actually taking place, and they recognize there's no way Ukraine cannot win this war. They do not have the manpower or technology to do so.
Yes, along those lines, I saw this Daily Mail headline today. Putin is facing a quick military catastrophe with his army in an impossible situation where both attacking or defending will cause further defeats, former Russian defense minister warns. So you're saying that's totally lying there?
Yes, they're just making crap up. It is ridiculous. When Russia started this special military operation, as they called it, they were outnumbered 3-1. Ukraine had more troops than Russia deployed at the time, and yet Russia took an enormous amount of territory and advanced. Then on top of it, now the troop ratios have flip-flopped. Russia has twice as many troops in the field as Ukraine, and that number may go to 3. So, I don't know what these guys are talking. The Brits really are notorious liars. They are pretending that Ukraine has, pushed back Russia out of fortified cities, and you don't have a single instance of that. In fact, the area, they talked to the Kharkov offensive in September. All that was the Russians did a tactical withdrawal because they didn't have enough troops. Going back to the point I made earlier about on this broad front, 450-mile front, they only had 10,000 people there, and they weren't going to stand and fight over a bunch of pasture. I don't know if you've ever been to Kansas, but a lot of what the battles that are taking place in Ukraine, it looks like it's being on the plains of Kansas or Nebraska. Vast, open, empty spaces with trees here and there, but not heavily fortified cities. And so far, the Ukrainians have not taken a single fortified city where the Russians were fighting to defend the city. It hasn't happened. Whereas Russia took Mariupol, and they're in the process of taking other towns back. They already captured Luhansk, and they're in the process of freeing the net. So it's just, it's not going in a timetable that most Americans would like to see, but, it is the Russians have their own clock.
So when is it fair to say that Putin has thought that this conflict would be resolved faster than it is unfolding, or?
I don't know. I don't think so. He just, you watch him when he speaks, he is completely unruffled, despite a persistent Western propaganda campaign portraying, Putin's got cancer, Putin has Parkinson's disease, Putin has irritable bowel syndrome, Putin soiled himself the other day because he couldn't hold his bowels in.
Yeah, they said he fell down the stairs, soiling himself all the way down. I'm like, what is going on with these writers over there?
I know. Yeah, I think they got Putin confused with Joe Biden. Because if anybody's going to be falling downstairs, it'll be Biden. Yeah. No, so it's just the West fixation. It's really sort of an obsession, and I think there actually is a religious or an anti-religious dimension to this, because Putin is a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church. He is not a communist. He's not a godless communist. He believes in God. And within that, he believes very strongly in the nuclear family, that it's a husband and wife and children. He is very much against the global homosexual agenda of promoting homosexuality as normal. And he has resisted that. They passed laws to that effect. And I think that really helps explain in part the vitriol in the West directed at Putin, because he will not bow to this, what he views as Western corruption and just Western degeneracy, to put it frankly. So that it is almost, in a sense, the irony is Russia is fighting to uphold the traditions of Western civilization while being castigated as being anti-Western.
Yeah, I've said before that if all Putin has to do if he wants to get the West to support him is to come out in higher heels than Zelensky did, and they'd say, "We've seen the light. We were mistaken. We're going to back Putin. He's the one." But that's the kind of it is a kind of ideological commitment. But you were in the CIA. How much of these agencies that are involved in this foreign policy quagmire, how much of them truly believe in that ideological part of it? Is it the mid-level managers and down that believe in the narrative? Oh yeah, we're fighting for transgender rights in Russia. We're gonna make sure we put that in there, or versus this is just what we sell people who need something to buy into, and it's just pure Machiavellian cold calculation.
Our intelligence agencies are fundamentally broken. The problem starts with leadership, and even if you're a relatively new analyst or even an experienced analyst, the odds if you speak up and oppose this will be reflected in your annual performance appraisal report, and you will not be promoted. And most people rely, they're dependent economically on these jobs, so they're not going to put their livelihood at risk. But I heard yesterday from a friend who was part of a briefing, listening to a brief that was being made by the Defense Intelligence Agency on the casualties in Ukraine. And when they reported, they were reporting astronomical Russian casualties, minimizing Ukrainian casualties, and a 3-star general asked them directly, well, what's your source of this? And they had said, well, it's what the Ukrainians have told us. Now, your job as an intelligence analyst is supposed to actually get to the truth. You don't listen to what somebody with a vested interest is telling you. You got other ways to check, to verify. Use overhead imagery that looks at hospitals. You can look at the graveyards, number of graves being dug, a whole variety of things. They're not doing it. The people who are responsible in the U.S. government for making sure that you got the straight truth on the military is lying. There's no other way to put it. They're lying. They're refusing to do their job, and they're taking the garbage that's being given them by Ukraine and passing that on as if it's reliable intelligence. So one of these days, there's gonna be a come to Jesus moment where these lies will be totally exposed, and all of a sudden people will be saying, well, but, and it won't matter because Russia will have effectively crushed Ukraine, and in the process, I think we'll see the destruction of NATO, at least NATO breaking up as a viable organization.
So, when you look at Hollywood, the history of Hollywood, there's been a lot of, and even now and years past, a lot of movies always making Russian people out to be evil. Do that, whether they always make these cartoonish caricatures. Does that come from Cold War, fears, or is that something else? It seems like there's a deeper hatred for Russian people in the British culture too. They really, really just foaming at the mouth, the media there.
Yeah, this goes back centuries, really. Remember, Napoleon got all the way to Moscow and invaded Russia and was finally forced out. It is, I think, part of it has to do with religion, because the Eastern Orthodox Church does not, they have a different calendar, a different approach to Catholic doctrine than the Roman Catholic Church of Rome. It's worth noting that you don't have the problem of pedophilia and the rape of children that is so common in the Catholic Church that you do in the Eastern Orthodox Church. That's number one. So you've got this Western hatred of Russia because Russia has not been a conquering imperial power. Name the number of colonies that Russia had in Africa. None. How about, that was French, British, German, England. They're the ones who went out and colonized and enslaved other people, not the Russians. So it is this, it's like the hatred of Donald Trump. It is just completely emotional, detached from reality.
You recently wrote on your blog, sonar21.com, about this recent attack on the U.S. HIMARS hit an improvised barracks of Russian soldiers and killed at least 63. And that's been a big, you said that this is kind of like a tell in poker. Can you explain the Western reaction as a tell?
Yeah, because if it was true that they were killing upwards of 100 to 200 Russians a day, what is killing 63, or there's actually the death toll is up to 89 now. Why is that such a big deal? Because if you're killing that many Russians, just like, so what? The fact that they got so excited was this is really the first time in this 10-month war now that Ukraine has actually been able to kill more than 20 Russians at a time. Because and the reason for that is the Russians are not sending human wave attacks against fixed defended Ukrainian positions. They're using standoff, they're using artillery, and because they fire 7 to 8 times the number of shells that Ukraine can fire, what that means is they're inflicting more damage on Ukraine than Ukraine can inflict upon the Russians. So the exuberance, is really an overreaction on the part of the West. It is quite telling to me of how desperate they are for getting some news of success. Because if you go back to March, and I know this for a fact from a friend who was in the intelligence community at the time, the intelligence community's line was they hoped that Russia was going to run out of missiles. Now, that was last March. And since then, you get on almost every month, every week, a prediction that Russia's going to run out. And then what happens is Russia turns around and launches an even larger missile attack in Ukraine. So it's really just this disconnect from reality in the West, and the tendency we confuse propaganda with real progress on the ground.
So the whole purpose of the propaganda is just to keep the Western and American people believing that just a few more $1 billion, just to keep pumping the money over there. They don't want the public opinion to go sour in terms of our involvement. That's the whole point of that, right?
Yeah, and when you consider that we've now increased our defense spending up to $850 billion, this is insane. We've spent in the last year $100 billion alone in Ukraine. Yeah. It is the money we spent in Ukraine is more than the Russians allocate for their own defense budget, national defense budget. It just the sums of money are so vast, and it's a reminder that our economy it's so corrupted through a combination of the defense industry and the pharmaceutical companies. Those are the two big ones that line up and provide money to members of Congress, and then they get money allocated in the budget for themselves. It's absurd, but we're going to bankrupt ourselves, and it's like somebody that goes on a spending spree with a credit card. Day comes and the bill shows up, and you got to pay that credit card, or they cut it up, and you don't get to use it anymore.
Yeah, that's true. I wanted people to go to your website, sonar21.com. That's the number 21, sonar21.com, to check out more of your comments in your blog. While I have you real quick, I wanted to ask you, it was a few weeks ago, it started going in the news. Tucker Carlson was talking about the JFK files that Trump didn't fully disclose, and how he talked to somebody who had seen the ones that still remain unreleased, and they asked him point blank, did the CIA have a role in killing President Kennedy? He said, and the source told Tucker's team yes, and it would, basically our government that you've known of so far is basically a lie or something to that effect. As someone who worked in that agency, what are your thoughts on this, and why is this story coming out in the mainstream all of a sudden?
I never discount the possibility of putting stories like this out to distract people. It's possible that I've heard it described as dissident CIA officers may have been involved with the plot. CIA certainly has been covering up its role and relationship with Oswald, just simply to avoid embarrassment. But it's unfortunate that they keep the information hidden.
Larry Johnson, thank you, sir, for your time.
Hey, Dave, always a pleasure, man. Thank you.
Very good. Sonar21.com is his website. Check it out. You can also learn about his firearms training there for those of you in the Central Florida area.